Um, so hi, everybody. Welcome to Openscapes' 8th community call. We are recording and there's a transcript also available at the bottom of your Zoom settings. Openscapes is an initiative to help researchers do better science in less time together. And through our mentorship programs, we help research teams develop habits for data-intensive science that is more open, reproducible, collaborative, inclusive, and kind. All of our Openscapes activities are bound by our code of conduct, and we ask that you be respectful and value each other's ideas, styles, and viewpoints, and lead by example and match your actions with your words. I wanted to give a brief land acknowledgement. I'm grateful for the land where I am here in Santa Barbara, California, and I'd like to honor the Chumash peoples who have been and continue to be stewards of the lands and waters here. These land acknowledgements are one way to amplify the knowledge and work of Indigenous peoples, and you can learn more about the land that you're on at this website that we've included in the document on the top of page 3. So our plan for today is that in today's conversation, we're so excited to welcome Dr. Sean Kross, who has been a longtime collaborator with Openscapes. Sean is going to share how to design automated workflows, leveraging existing open source tools and your existing workflows. And this is really thinking about how you can design workflows that include other people in the future. So this is the idea of Future Us. So what we'll do for today is we'll have, for the first 30 minutes, we'll have a celebrity interview style conversation with Sean Kross, where he'll also likely screen share and demo what the workflow is he's designed. And then we'll have 15 minutes of conversation with your questions. And we'll end at 10:55 p.m. or a.m. Pacific time. And our interviewer is Stephanie Butland, who is part of the Openscapes core team. So we're really, with Openscapes, we're really building a culture here where we all help each other out as we learn. And so as part of that, I'm just going to screen share briefly to show you how to think about this document that we're working, where we'll take notes together if you'd like. So you can always type your questions in chat or below here. And there's also a spot later on to share resources. We're using headers with Google Docs. And so you're able to see this kind of outline view where we've got different sections labeled in the outline view. And you're able to see that if your outline view isn't on by coming here to view and clicking show outline. So with that, I will introduce Sean Kross. It is such a pleasure to introduce him. This is Dr. Sean Kross. He is a data staff scientist at the Fred Hutch Data Science Lab. His work includes understanding data science as a practice, and his approach combines computational, statistical, ethnographic, and design-driven methods. Sean earned his PhD in computer-human interaction at UC San Diego, where he was advised by Philip Gao, and he interned at Microsoft Research. And before grad school, Sean was the Chief Technology Officer at Johns Hopkins Data Science Lab. He's also a frequent consultant for data analysis and software development projects, and a maintainer of several open source software projects. And I also wanted to share as an introduction that I met Sean Kross through our OpenSci. And I remember vividly how he started talking to me as we walked to dinner at one of the unconfs. And I was a scientist, very new to R, and really kind of intimidated by software development. And having Sean be one of these friendly people who really welcomed me and helped me feel like I belonged as a data scientist was really transformative for me. And it's led to a really beautiful collaboration and friendship through time. And he's been deeply involved with Openscapes since the very beginning. So there's a picture in the doc of Sean listening to scientists and helping develop software strategies and workflow strategies. And so we're just really grateful and appreciative that you're here, Sean. So with that, I will turn it over to you, Steph.
Thank you, Julie. this manner of setting the stage and welcoming everybody to the way we do this kinds of things. I'm already feeling warm and fuzzy, and we barely started. So Sean, I'm wondering how you are doing today, and maybe you can tell us something about where you are geographically and something you like about it.
Hey, Stephanie, I'm doing great. And Julie, thanks so much for that really, really warm and wonderful introduction. I'm doing really well. So, I right now am in my office on the campus of the Fred Hutch Cancer Center. And something that I'm really blessed with, which is just really kind of incredible for every one of my work days here, is the Cancer Center is located in the South Lake Union neighborhood of Seattle. And so my office is overlooking this wonderful Lake Union, with lots of people out on their boats and paddleboarding, and there are also seaplanes landing every 20 minutes. So it's just a very idyllic Pacific Northwest picturesque kind of a scene. And so, yeah, I'm super lucky that I get to enjoy this.
It's so great. I'm wondering if anybody's bold enough to be paddleboarding at 10 in the morning in March in Seattle, but probably are. Can you tell us a bit about your background, Sean? Tell us maybe a story of your experiences that led to your current work. We know you have this work at Fred Hutch. You also do consulting, and you've always also been involved in Openscapes. So tell us about how all that goes down.
Yeah, so I think that once upon a time I thought I wanted to be a computational biologist, and I started working in computational biology labs, and I realized that the experience of doing that work was extraordinarily inhumane, to say the least. Folks who were trying to do really sophisticated programming and computer science type of work weren't really being supported in those efforts. There weren't a lot of resources for them. There weren't a lot of tools that were designed for people doing that kind of work. And that in general got me really interested. That experience in general just got me interested in the work of thinking about and designing tools and resources for folks who do work in the computational sciences in general, whether that be folks doing astronomy or folks doing fishery sciences, or as now many of my colleagues at Fred Hutch who are doing some kind of computational biomedicine. Of course, a lot of it related to oncology. So working with those kinds of folks led me to this PhD in human-computer interaction. I specifically wanted to work with advisors who thought about designing exactly for this kind of audience that I'm interested in. And I was really lucky to find that at UC San Diego, and to find that in my work with my advisor, Philip Guo. And so, I graduated from my PhD just in June of 2022, and I was, I was actually kind of lined up to do a postdoc that I was really excited about at Northwestern, and an old colleague of mine, whose name is Jeff Leake, he's the new chief data officer of Fred Hutch. He called me up and he was like, he was a tenured professor at Johns Hopkins, and he called me up and he was like, "You're never going to believe what job I just was offered, at Fred Hutch. I'm really considering doing it, and would you, consider coming to work for me?" And so it was just a real. I just feel like the timing was really great, and I just got very lucky with this opportunity to really extend the work that I was doing in my PhD, designing tools and methods and resources, and working directly with people doing computational biomedicine. So yeah, I mean, in terms of my, of my consulting work, it really, has been like great opportunity just to see what other folks are up to in the data science and like R and Python programming type of communities. You know, of course, like a lot of the work that I do in my day job is consulting style work anyway, where I'm working on individual projects for folks. So really, it's just like, you know, an extension of that and one way of keeping my ear to the ground, just to see what's going on out there in like the wider world. And, you know, in terms of Openscapes, I'm super lucky to have met Julie and to have met lots of different folks through the R OpenSci unconferences, which were a really incredible set of unconferences hosted by R OpenSci, which, you know, at that time was a part of the Berkeley Institute of Data Science, but has since, you know, really expanded and flourished. And yeah, I'm super lucky that Julie was one of the people that I met there, and it's been incredible to see Openscapes grow and develop. And you know, I've you know have done, you know, some things, including developing the software we're going to talk about to try to support Openscapes, because I just think that it's just a fantastic program that is like exactly what is needed in the world right now of people doing this kind of computational and scientific work.
That's so cool. And there's comments in the chat here how yes, people recognize Shani here, who is, Shani, you can give a wave if you like, who is our OpenSci's current community manager. And when I was community manager, this is where I met Sean and Julie through our OpenSci. So this community and organization has had such a huge impact on so many people in so many ways. So thank you for bringing that up, Sean. Why don't we turn to the reason that some people came here to hear about things, which is why this tool? Why Kyber? What was the initial motivation that led to developing this Kyber package, and then take it from there?
Sure. So, you know, first I should definitely say that, you know, the success of those R OpenSci events, they would not have been as successful without you, Stephanie. So also, you know, thank you for you know, organizing those and you know, your role in putting those together. So when Julie put together the cohort model, you know, the Openscapes Champions cohort model, as you know, as like basically an intervention into like the scientific lives of these, you know, of these labs and how they work and that kind of thing, and that you know, the fact that like that plan, you know, or yeah, that plan and that kind of an intervention, you know, of course, I think that she wanted to reproduce that experience for multiple labs, for multiple cohorts, and just in conversations with her, you know, she was putting lots of different materials together. You know, a lot of them, you know, the approach in these interventions, of course, you know, some of it was like very similar and very structured. So, you know, some of it, of course, had to be kind of custom tailored to the folks that she was dealing with, you know, in terms of who was participating in the cohorts. And so I think that like led us to this idea of, well, like, you know, to what extent can we automate and kind of productionize parts of just putting these cohorts together, right? And of course, you know, in our open science way, you know, Julie was building all of the different parts of Openscapes using open tools, right? So it was just kind of an intuitive extension to say like, well, you know, you're using either, you know, tools that are open source or tools that are very openly easy to access, you know, things like Google Docs and like Google Drive and Google Sheets and that kind of thing. And so, you know, is there like a layer that we can put on that will help to integrate these different tools that you're using already. So, that, including GitHub, Markdown and RMarkdown, and Google Sheets, Google Drive, and that kind of thing. And can we, can we make this interface can we design like a similar kind of interface to the kind of research software that you're used to interacting with anyway, right? So that it's not a big lift in terms of in terms of like needing to pick up some new technical prowess or anything like that, right? Something that mostly just works out of the box. So those were our motivations and kind of like the headwinds that led to creating this R package. And so I sketched it out a little bit, but that is kind of the way that Kyber works is the idea is to keep all of the data in terms of metadata about the different cohorts, data about where things are on GitHub in something like a Google Sheet, right? It's not really necessary to have some like enormous database. Google Sheets are easy for everyone to interact with and edit and comment on, and it's like an interface that folks know, so it really fills that need nicely. And the idea is like, can we pull that information down from Google Sheets using R, and then can we automate the setup of starting a GitHub repository for a champions cohort, and adding people to that repository, adding files to that repository, and as the cohort goes along, kind of like managing and creating some of the templated documents that are used throughout the champions cohort, right? So that's what Kyber, and all of those documents are built based on really metadata that's either in Google Sheets or on GitHub.
Sean, would you want to share the slides you put together to sort of emphasize what you were just
Yeah,
describing?
sure.
I'm also happy. I've got them up too. I can
And
screen
for folks who want to have a look at the slides, I've just put a link in the chat.
Here, I think I'll just thumb through this. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Yeah, so, kind of along the lines of what I said, like, Openscapes is already making like heavy use of Google Drive and GitHub. And so the idea was, can we use R to bring both like the data that's on Google Drive and some of the materials that we want to distribute on GitHub? Can we use R to kind of like bring those together and make that happen? I was also interested in like learning, building this package was kind of also like an opportunity for me to learn a lot more about RMarkdown and creating parameterized reports in RMarkdown and seeing how like those parameterized reports could be used in the Openscapes champions cohort setting. And then, the question was just like, how many of these processes can we automate? And can we kind of like maximize automation with just minimal programming that needs to be done from the end user who's using this Kyber package? So kind of, in a nutshell, Kyber reads in data from Google Sheets, and then it either it takes that metadata and creates our Markdown documents, which are then exported to Google Docs. And it also sets up files and repositories and organizes people on GitHub, again, based on information that it gets from Google Sheets. So, in that sense, I think it's relatively straightforward. And, the way that we went about designing basically functions in this package were just to think about, okay, we need to like keep as much data as possible in Google Sheets because that a Google Sheet is easy to share, it's easy to edit. And then any of like the Julie was doing a lot of these manual steps for setting up each of the cohorts. And the question was, well, can we just take each of those manual steps, make sure that, there's data to inform those steps in Google Sheets, and can we, create an R package that would just do this, do a lot of these steps for you. The idea was to try to keep the scope of the package small enough that it was as simple as running like a piece of published scientific software. And of course, we wanted to keep things flexible. So the nice thing about like these Google Sheets inputs and these R and RMarkdown outputs is that, if there are, of course, a lot of it is like parameterized and automated, but if you want to go into either the RMarkdown or into Google Sheets and like edit things by hand and then run things again, that's relatively easy to do, right? So if there's, that way you're not kind of constrained by the automation. So for example, like Julie wanted to, was setting up a lot of GitHub repositories, and those repositories like needed files in them. So I wrote a function that just like sets up that repository. It sets up a repository using data from Google Sheets, and then you can, depending on what kind, what's going on in that cohort, there are different functions to add different files to that repository automatically. For managing the team on GitHub, there was a lot of clicking around GitHub work that was just inconvenient. And thankfully, GitHub exposes all of its functionality through an API. So almost anything that you can like click around and do on GitHub, you can do programmatically. So I just wrote some functions to streamline that for Openscapes, right? So there's a function for creating a team, adding team members, and then adding that team to a GitHub repository. And then of course, so within the Kyber package, there are lots of RMarkdown, a little like snippet RMarkdown documents that get rearranged and like reshuffled depending on what kind of champions cohort is being built and which like call of that champions cohort is taking place. So I built a few functions that basically like manage that content that's in these RMarkdown snippets. And so again, based on data that's stored in Google Sheets, you can use like the call agenda function, and it will build the agenda for a particular champions cohort call for you, all based on things that you've specified in Google Sheets. And then there are some other functions for like creating readmes and creating some other documents that are all parameterized, and the RMarkdown skeletons for those documents are within the Kyber package.
I want to chime in here, Sean, and say, as the primary current user for Kyber, this is just so wonderful because I am able to, from the README, copy a code snippet that's like 3 lines, paste it into an R script in RStudio, run it, and it does the thing. And so it helps with time. And even with having Kyber around, there's so much repetitive work that has to be done. Kyber saves so much of this, so it saves us time. It also reduces the chances of copy paste errors that we still make sometimes. And so one of the ways we like to think about things is with open science, imagine what you could do with the time you saved. It's not just about adding more onto your workload, but what more could we do if we had this time saved, and think about bigger things. I wanted to make sure that we have time to get to lots of things we want to talk about. Was there anything else, Sean, that you wanted to screen share and say about this topic we're talking about, Kyber itself?
That's okay. We can move on. Yeah.
Well, and we can certainly come back to any of it.
Yeah.
So I know that some people here are really interested in this, creating parameterized docs. There are people here from NOAA Fisheries who have to make a lot of reports.
Sure.
So I'm wondering, for people who, let's say, I don't work for Openscapes, is Kyber still useful for me? Like what other applications do you see for Kyber, if any? Or
Sure.
Kyber-like tools?
Sure. So like this is like a world that I have really been submerged in, especially at Hutch, because of course there's a ton of governmental and other compliance related reporting that has to be done at a cancer research center. And so I think that there's actually like a lot of the both like code and design philosophy of Kyber I plan on repurposing for folks around here for sure. I think that as a as a general philosophy, and in fact, I've even thought about like, basically like building a skeleton of a package for supporting these kinds of parameterized reports, where it's the kind of thing that you could, pick up and maybe like build from. But I wouldn't have had like the insight about how to build that kind of thing without doing this Kyber project, right? So I think that like I've tried to write the code to make it like as approachable as possible in terms of if people want to go look around at the functions and see how they manage different chunks of RMarkdown, and how they actually like fit the parameters into the documents and how the documents are created. And of course, like I'm happy to talk to folks both in the Q&A but afterwards too, who are interested in doing this kind of thing. Thankfully RMarkdown has like it's been a fantastic platform to build on for doing this kind of work.
Thanks, Sean. One of my favorite things about Sean, and I guess it's from like reading your tweets or reading something you've written or hearing about different phases in your career progression and education and the way you think about these things. I am keen for you to talk about some of the things we talked about before, giving everyone advice about engaging in this kind of tool development project in general. So moving a little more into the philosophy of, for you, what makes a compelling tool development project, and when you're starting a collaboration or someone gets in touch with you and says, hey, I've got this great idea for a dashboard. Tell us about what it's like to work through what you're going to do and how you do that. So, get as philosophical as you'd like to here.
Sure. So, something that I really learned from and now have like conspired a lot with this idea, but also with my boss, who was also my former boss, this Jeff Leake, has this philosophy of like, if anything is free online to really, or in terms of a service or in terms of like an open source piece of software, is like thinking about how you can push that service or software like to its absolute limits. And so one of my favorite examples of these is that like Jeff has a GitHub repository that is the most forked GitHub repository on GitHub, which I don't know, to me is if you're a GitHub nerd like me, like that's mind blowing. And so I think that this Kyber project was kind of an iteration of that, where it was like, well, we've got like, I know how the Openscapes folks, how they would like to work. I know like how these, something about how these parameterized reports in RMarkdown work, and how can we like bring those things in like kind of a close alignment so that basically the Openscapes folks can benefit from all of this work that they would be doing already, but also get all these advantages from like the potential for a lot of their work to be automated. And so like that so of course that tension is always like a negotiation and is ultimately a design process. So, it's very collaborative work, which I deeply enjoy. There's always a give and take, like there's always like a kind of negotiation that you have to do. But I think that ultimately, you discover together better ways of working. And, that's very gratifying for me, but I also think that it my hope is that it makes people happier, and that in doing their work, and it allows them to do better work over a longer period of time. Another piece of like philosophical belief that I have in terms of building these systems is to make things as modular as possible. So each of these each of the RMarkdown files that get compiled into these larger documents are kind of like as small as they can be. Each function in this package really tries to just do one thing well, and then the idea is that you can compose the functions differently to get different behavior. Of course, you can compose the different RMarkdown templates differently to create different longer length documents. And so I think that and of course, this is something that's inherent to the way that a lot of R is designed, right? In terms of the package ecosystem and that kind of thing. So I'm a big believer in modularity. It really enables reusability and repurposing of tools.
So basically, you're not trying to make Kyber the next ggplot2. It doesn't need to do everything. It needs to do what Openscapes needs it to do to help us along the way.
That's so interesting. I could probably talk about that question for another hour.
I think you might have said that before in the past. I'm just quoting.
Yeah.
I'm just quoting you.
Yeah.
Thanks for the tip. I want to make sure that we get to audience Q&A. I'm going to take a pause. Sean, think for a moment. Is there, what question did we not ask you that we should have? I think someone's added a question there, but I'll also take this minute to invite people to add their own questions under the discussion heading right below our questions. If you add your name there, then we can invite you to unmute and ask. But yeah, Sean, what didn't we ask you? What do you want to say before we open it up to questions?
Well, so I think that in terms of what you didn't ask me is, of course, and maybe folks are asking this in the audience questions, it's how can other people get into doing this, right? So I think, on one hand, as always, our studio really produces some great resources in terms of, Hadley Wickham's R Packages book, Yihui's RMarkdown and Bookdown books. And, the other thing that I want to sort of advertise and, folks should keep an eye out for is that, so, in my new job in the Fred Hutch Data Science Lab, we're spinning up a whole university at Fred Hutch, not actually a university, but a huge, basically adult education effort for scientists. And a component of that is definitely going to include a lot of programming work, a lot of R, and definitely, definitely serious discussion about building parameterized reports. I don't think that the timeline for that, where you'd actually see content about that's related to what I've been talking about today and what we've been discussing, you might not see content until the fall. But I'm just, if you want to keep up with and sorry, a very important thing to say is that all of the educational efforts that we're doing here, we're going to be broadcasting online, sharing all of the materials online, sharing all of the recorded videos for all of the classes. And so if that's something that you might be interested in, I need to plug our newsletter, which is FH, like Fred Hutch, fhdata.substack.com. We only, it's the name of the newsletter is Monday Morning Data Science. We only email you once a week, but if you want to keep up with what we're doing, that's the best way to do it. And in the fall, there should be like a lot of content that's related to these topics rolling out.
Sean, this thing you just described is precisely the kind of like radical pedagogical thing that I associate with you. So it's going to be amazing.
Sure.
I'm going to get to questions, and I'm wondering if Sam, would you like to unmute and ask Sean your question?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all. Thanks, Sean. This has been really fascinating and super cool. I can envision a lot of really cool uses for this package in ways that I didn't realize existed before. My question is a little bit tangential to some of what we've talked about, but I think along the vein of where the conversation's kind of led. And like, it's really impressive to hear about all the different projects and like groups. And obviously you have a full-time job, consulting work on the side. You're involved in our OpenSci and other data science communities online. Like it's a lot and it's very inspiring and also like seems kind of overwhelming. I'm curious, like as an early career professional who is starting to find responsibilities with multiple different groups and different capacities, like how you manage all of that.
Sure. So I think there are two things that come to mind. The first thing is that I have been like extraordinarily privileged in the sense of being able to like work in the open a lot. And so I think that like, and you know, in that sense, being able to put things on GitHub, on websites, on YouTube, what have you. And so I think that like that has like magnified the perception of like what I've been able to work on based on other folks, right? Just because, you know, there are very few like secrets or like proprietary things that I've worked on, honestly, right? So, you know, I think that, you know, that is like a, you know, not everyone gets to do that. I've been very lucky that I've been able to do that. But I think that, you know, probably a more, maybe like a more useful comment, which is my second point, is something that, and I had like a sense of this, but not like a formal sense of it really until my PhD. And this is like a core teaching of my PhD advisor, Philip Woe, is the concept of like fire in motion, which is actually like a concept from like warfighting and like modern combat, which is that like if you're like, which basically in a nutshell means like you like it's always better to be like moving forward, even if you're just moving forward a little bit. And so if that means like if that means you know that you have time, like, you know, you have 20 minutes to write like 3 sentences for like a blog post that you've been working on, and like you don't know when that blog post is going to get posted necessarily, like taking that time and like doing something is really adds up, and it's like much better than doing nothing, thinking like, oh my gosh, I really like don't have time, like I only have 20 minutes, I really like don't have time to work on this, or that kind of thing, right? If it wasn't for those, there are like lots of gaps in the day where honestly, like a revolution in being able to have this mindset and kind of like keep the fire and motion philosophy going is I use Notion heavily, which is both like a web application and a phone application, and being able to just like write ideas and blog posts and little like snippets of text in Notion has been like hugely beneficial. You know, before that I used other tools, and you know, I guess one other thing that I'll say is that, and you know, this kind of goes hand in hand with fire and emotion and working in the open, is that you know, there's this great David Robinson tweet about how things like something perfect on your, or something very imperfect that's published online, you know, on a website, in a tweet, wherever, is like 10,000 times more valuable than a perfect thing on your hard drive. So, just like, you've got to get used to just like, and it's very, it's very hard, and it's still hard for me, but like, it's easy to say like, oh yeah, hit the publish button like as much as possible, just to get things out. But it's still hard. I know it's hard for everyone. The only advice I have in terms of that getting easier is just to like make yourself do it. And I think that every time you press publish, it does get a little easier.
That I love that question, and I love all the answers you've given to that. And we've got some notes in the document here. I'm wondering, there's one question Christine asked in the doc, and I'm wondering, Christine, could you unmute and ask? And at the same time, Jim Iannelli has, I think, a related question in the chat. So in slide 2, the graphic shows an arrow between RMarkdown to Google Doc. Is there an example of that process? So like, into the nuts and bolts of Kyber itself. And then maybe
Sure.
So keep that in mind. And then maybe Christine, you can ask your question now.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. My question is a self-serving question, but hopefully it's useful for others as well, which is, a lot of this seems to be about creating the folder and creating the GitHub repo. And so I was wondering, is this the sort of thing that would save time for an existing project, or would the amount of time you have to spend kind of munging or converting your current project into this format to work with the Kyber tools going to be more intensive than the benefit you're going to get from trying to adopt it going forward?
So this is that's a great question, and is like the central question of like automating any process, right? Is like, is the time I'm going to sink into this going to be worth it? And I think that, something that I think makes this package successful is the amount of these champions cohort calls that are the same, right? And that in for a lot of the content of these calls, they can be filled in basically kind of like Mad Libs style in terms of filling metadata into these documents. And it's because Openscapes has a particular process and a particular point of view and worldview, and that informs their curriculum. And so there's like there's always that like baseline of documents that they're creating. That then, of course, my understanding is that then they get there's some like custom editing on top of that, but that there was a continuous amount of like writing and like stitching together and clicking around work that they were doing basically the same thing every single time for every single call, right? And knowing that like all these calls are going to happen in the future, it was worth the investment. So I think that like you do, the more you're in that situation, the easier it is to make the decision to automate things, right? That being said, if I mean, and I'd be happy to talk to you about your situation, your personal situation as well, because like, I think that a lot of these things seem like a lot heavier lift than they are. Just in terms of things as simple as like creating an R package, right? I think that that unfortunately is intimidating to a lot of people, but actually is relatively simple and like hugely beneficial, and something that I at least think that people should do more of, right?
Sean, may I interrupt? Yeah. I was going to invite Julie to actually comment. Go ahehead, Julie.
Yeah, I was wondering, maybe I'll just screen share just for a second and say a few things, and then Sean, you can give more detail. Because I think, so this workflow that we had, we've got this Google sheet, which, Sean said that this is where we're keeping our metadata. And then with Kyber, we're able to do a call or sorry, use a function where we tell it that Google Sheet, we give it the cohort number or whatever identifier that we need. So let me show you what this part looks like just on the Google Sheet side. There's, first of all, just, this is our cohort metadata thing. So like for us, this is each champions cohort we've had, but this could be your annual report or your study sites or what, like kind of real, again, like taking the things that were in my head and being like, oh, let me structure this in a way that would be useful to connect to an R package. Like that was kind of a thought process that Sean and I talked through. And then in terms of the actual call metadata, like also breaking up like like our agenda document, like the one we're using today, like what are the pieces of it? Like there's an opening, there are the goals of the day, roll call, welcome, introductions, all these things. And then actually I took these and saved them in specific RMarkdown files, so there's a mindset.rmarkdown, there's a GitHub publishing. And what Sean and I then worked together, this is the Kyber GitHub package, on the repo on GitHub. What that looks like for me is in this inst folder, I created, each of these separate little snippets of our Markdown file, like these are like these little pieces that then what Kyber does is like, I don't know, what did we say, Sean? It was like making a sandwich out of these, just like all the ingredients, like let's put it in a sandwich. And then so you can see like, we've got these normal 5 cohort calls that are sort of our normal thing. And what Steph and I have been doing in kind of a hacky way going forward is like, if there's 6 calls, let's enumerate them in the teens so that those can be together. That's going to be our system until like, maybe someday we design this into Kyber to handle in some other way. But, how do we kind of take what's working and like push it a little further? And then Sean, I think, Jim's question is about then how do you take, this R Markdown stuff and into Google Docs? And the short answer is right now, we copy paste the knitted R Markdown and paste it into a Google Doc because that connection between R Markdown and Google Doc is still tricky. And maybe that's not our task to solve. But what's something that's interesting too is right now we're leading a cohort that is working in Microsoft Word and Teams. And so we're having to paste it in there too. So it actually gives us a little bit of flexibility for different tools that people use. But I'll stop there, Sean. What would you add? No,
I think that was all very well said. And yeah, I mean, I think that like the copy pasting is like, what's working right now. But, I think that like there's, of course, it depends on I think that that's like the compromise that was like, as working the best for us right now. But in terms of like, programmatically, there's no reason why in R you can't put a Word doc on, at least to put a Word doc on the Google Drive. I'm personally just not as familiar as like the Google Docs interface from R. But that's something I would like love to learn more about.
On this topic, I'd like to give Kelly an opportunity to, we've just got like, we want to go into the closing section, but Kelly, do you mind unmuting and asking your question? Because that's relevant here. Oh, Kelly, I can't.
Yeah, no problem. I was here. I think you might have answered it. I think I was curious. I was curious about how come you chose to use R instead of the functionality within Google Drive and other Google products itself. Like there's a coding capacity there, and so why not code some of it in Google instead of having to come outside of Google to put stuff back in Google?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it comes down to just like a few things, right? One thing is like there is, in fact, I've honestly just learned about this like kind of this calendar year about the coding capabilities that you can do within the Google Drive ecosystem itself. which are like amazing, and actually like yeah, just something that was like beyond what I like. There are things that I know you can do in Google Drive that I didn't realize Google Drive was like sophisticated enough to do until recently. The other part of it is that speaking for myself and also speaking for Julie, I knew that like this was a like the kind of like R as home base in terms of like where the work was being done was something that Julie and I and like other Openscapes folks at least were familiar with and comfortable with. The other thing is like in terms of just kind of like the straightforwardness of being able to like interact with different APIs, whether it be through Google Drive or through GitHub, was something that like I knew that we could accomplish in R. Of course, if you don't have R installed, if you're not like an R programmer, then I totally understand how that is like a workflow that isn't necessarily gonna work for you. Also like again, the parameterized reporting functionality, I imagine, like knowing what I have learned recently, I imagine that part of that could be accomplished within Google Drive itself. But it was something, at the time that we were writing Kyber, it was a sure bet that we could do that within an R package. Again, R packages were a kind of technology that Julie and I were comfortable with. So I think that had a lot to do with why we built an R package.
Yeah. Thank you, Sean. I'm going to pass it on to Julie to do our closing, but also include any wrapping up statements she wanted to make.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks so much, Steph. Thanks for the great interview, and Sean for sharing so much wisdom. And yeah, just love hearing you talk about your philosophy and design, and you're so generous with how you describe and support the open source community. On behalf of Openscapes, thank you so much, and thank you all for joining us. We'll post the video next week of this call along with the blog post so that you can share it with others or rewatch or whatnot. We have a few tips of the day that we like to end with. So an efficiency tip of the day, there's some keyboard shortcuts that you can use in our studio if you're running R code. And so, for example, on a Mac, Control Alt and R will run an entire script. Control Alt B will run a script from the beginning to a current line that you have. And then Control Alt E will run a script from a current line that your cursor is to the end. So that's pretty cool. And then an inclusion tip of the day is to embrace the power of yet for all of us as learners and teachers. So we can avoid terms like newbies and experts that can pretty narrowly define a person's skills or identity. So instead, we recommend using language like newer or less experienced coders and seasoned or more experienced coders. So you can learn more about the power of yet and Carol Dweck's work. So I think we'll leave it there. This document will continue to be a resource too if you wanted to check back to it. We've also got all of our notes about planning this event and whatnot are there too, if that helps you in your future events. So I think we will leave it there. Thanks so much, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. Bye.
Thanks so much, everybody. Thank you, Sean, and everybody for the great discussion.
Okay, and I will stop recording.